And that's exactly what Ms. Weiss did. Here to break down the latest controversy and the idea of so-called cancel culture more broadly is Representative Ralph Norman, the congressman serving South Carolina's 5th District. Congressman, when we talk about this idea of cancel culture, I mean, it's something that there's numerous examples that we could go through. Today provided a latest example at the New York Times. But more broadly, what is your take on this issue?
Well, my take on the issue is it's real. You've got the far left who is, they're radicals. They're pushing this socialist agenda. The defunding of the police is just a first step that they'll continue to expand on. What happened to Ms. Weiss is probably happening to all conservatives if they happen to be in the media. But you wonder why, if a liberal had gotten fired, they would have sounded off and you'd never heard the end of it. I wish more conservatives who had this kind of treatment would voice their opinion and would fight back. It's time to fight because they don't recognize weakness, nor should we.
And when it comes to Bari Weiss, too, I mean, we don't have to go that far back to look at an example of a conservative editor being fired. When Senator Tom Cotton, for example, wrote his op-ed in the New York Times, who, by the way, reached out to him, copy-edited his op-ed, and then published it, only to then, all of a sudden, face a little bit of pushback and then have an editor resign right then. That was an example of this cancel culture type thing in the works. That's an example of people not liking the opinion that was necessarily expressed. So when it comes to conservatives, should they be pushing back on this a little bit more firmly?
Absolutely. And I tell you, the tack to take is write more letters, let them turn it down, and just it exposes them for what they are, which is they are a minority trying to act like they're a majority. McClatchy just went bankrupt. I mean, they're struggling as it is, and they don't understand why. But people are not interested in their points of views. They're supposed to report the news, and they're not doing it. We have got to take the tack. We're going to let them know it. We're going to sound off, and we're going to voice our opinion on how lopsided and one-sided that the media is demonstrating now. And it's a radical agenda. And, it's not something we ought to tolerate laying down.
I think you bring up a good point, and it's this idea that what happens on social media doesn't reflect what actually happens in real life. I mean, the people who are very vocal on Twitter, for example, don't represent the average American. The average American, in fact, doesn't even use Twitter. It's something like 80% of all the content on Twitter comes from the same 20% of users. So that highlights the idea that the loudest voices are not always the ones that reflect the position of Americans. And we see that now being reflected in our newsrooms. President Trump last week said that this is a type of culture that we see in our boardrooms now, our college campuses. It's something that's becoming a lot more widespread. So when it comes to conservatives, should they make things such as this issue, such as online censorship, things that they say eliminates them from the public discourse of debate, should that become more of a campaign issue?
Absolutely. And we ought to be loud and voice our opinion. We're right. The majority in this country, the silent majority, they don't get any press coverage. They go to work. They love our country. They love our flag. And it's time for us to voice our opinion. It's not right for the minority to act like they're in the majority because they're not. The election of Donald Trump proved that. So, but we've got to have the courage to take some, the minute we speak out, we take the arrows that are coming in, and that's okay. The term racist is applied to everybody. If the sun comes up, you're racist. Well, we've got to say, you're wrong, and this is why we're right. We need to keep our conservative editorials coming. We need to keep our voices, make it loud. What happened to Ms. Weiss? She ought to be vocal about it because she's got a place, and just because you don't fit the narrative of the radical left is not right. That doesn't mean we need to be quiet. And I'm a member of the Freedom Caucus. We're a group that are going to be loud. We're going to be vocal. And we're going to make a difference in this country because we're going to lose our democracy if we don't.
And when it comes to this issue, too, as soon as it enters our newsrooms, that's troubling because those are the individuals who are supposed to be the objective, neutral arbiters of truth, the people who relay information regardless of the viewpoint. And when we see things like this, it just basically yells to the American people that we are taking a stance. It's not saying we're just delivering you the information anymore. It's saying that we are taking a position, and if you don't like it, that doesn't matter anymore because we're not listening to you. We're listening to the people inside of the newsroom. So more broadly about journalism, does this kind of put to end the conversation of whether there is objectivity when it comes to media?
Well, you know, the proof's in the pudding, as they say in the South. I mean, look at what the news is reporting. Look at how, if you could accuse, if there's one term that suits what the news media has done to Donald Trump and conservatives, it's assault and battery. They've exercised assault and battery over all the conservatives. See it with the firing of Ms. Weiss, the non-publishing of Senator Cotton, and now it's time for us to be vocal about it and not sit down and take it because you know, they've gotten by with this for a long time. If the shoe was reversed, they'd be shouting from the rooftops.
Yeah, and exactly. And I can guarantee you, too, that the newsrooms would respond to that shouting, whereas when it comes to conservatives shouting about the new op-ed, for example, for Senator Tom Cotton, those voices were mainly falling along deaf ears. So I think that highlights the very issue that we're talking about right now. And I think it's up to conservatives to stand up if they have an issue with this, to take some action one way or the other. I think you're exactly right to say that. But Representative Ralph Norman, I appreciate you coming on the show tonight. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.